In today's video, I wanted to go over the AWS Data Migration Service and give a basic introduction of this service. So, DMS stands for Data Migration Service, and it was really intended to assist AWS customers to bring data into AWS. So, you've got your own database with an on-prem. You need connectivity into AWS, and you set up this replication to move your data into AWS and keep ongoing changes there so that when you cut over, everything works. So the basic components of DMS are, first of all, you need a replication instance. So this is a server that AWS is managing. So you have basic access to it in terms of you can point your tasks at it, but it's not something that you can log on to directly. So you basically configure this instance and it's running in the background for you. And then you have source and target endpoints. So when you configure an endpoint, you need to give it a database, basically an IP address, unless you have DNS plugged into the DMS service. And then you need to have credentials. So you have to have a database username and a database password that has the necessary access to access the objects that you want to replicate. And then you create these tasks. And tasks are basically a list of tables that you want to migrate or move their data across using DMS. So here's how I have been using DMS. So 4 years ago, we had an issue. Decided to use DMS as an experiment to solve a problem. So the issue was we had a lot of load going on a production server, but it was being used for everything. It was being used for basic user interaction with the site as well as reporting. And the idea was, well, what if we can get the reporting users off onto another server? But that required some sort of replication. And so we needed something, and I came across DMS and I decided to experiment with it. So in our case, this was an Oracle database running standard edition. And your options are limited with respect to replication when you're running standard edition. So normally you need to upgrade to enterprise, which is very expensive in order to use these replication engines. But DMS did not require that. So put it into place, pointed all the reporting at the DMS instance, and it worked. And we've been using it for several years now. And, we've come across some issues, but overall, it's worked out very well. So the challenges, and what I like to say is DMS works great until it doesn't, because that's just kind of how it works. It'll just it'll just chime along for months on end with no issues, and then all of a sudden you hit an issue, and you're diving in and trying to figure out what's going on. And many times what I've had to do is open a support case with AWS because they have tools that we do not have as users. So there are certain things that are just not exposed to a user that they were able to go and look at some log or some console that we don't have access to and determine that certain resources, we didn't have enough memory or some disk space or something like that on the replication instance was an issue. And I think they're improving a lot of this stuff. So over time, they're adding these capabilities and monitoring in. So I think long term, a lot of this will be self-service. But in the past, I've had to get support involved to solve some of these problems. The another thing that I've sort of discovered is that that each task has its own replication log reader. And one of the ideas I had was to try and split my replication tasks into like groups of tables so that if I did have some sort of failure, it would be more isolated and it wouldn't affect every table that we're replicating. But that has caused some performance issues because each one of the tasks had its own log reader, and they're pretty heavy hitting processes. So you don't want to have too many of them running on your production instance. And another thing you need to make sure that you take care of is that when you add new tables into a task, make sure they have the necessary prerequisites, which in Oracle, that means the table has to have a primary key. So that means that it has a unique identifier for each row. And that's how replication works. It needs to know exactly which row it needs to go and update at the target, or in some cases, if it's new data insert, it needs to make sure it's not already there. So a primary key is what it uses in order to do that. And then the other thing is to enable supplemental logging in Oracle so that it has additional information in the transaction logs that's needed for DMS to operate. So I wanted to go over just the high level basics of creating a task. So what you need to do is you create a task identifier. It's just a name that you give the task that you're going to use to manage it going forward. And then you specify a replication instance that you're going to use. You start out with, you'll create a replication instance, and these are EC2 instances in the background, so you're going to have to give the EC2 specs when you create the replication instance. And that's just, what type of instance you're going to run, and that'll dictate how much disk space and how much memory you're going to get. And then you need to specify a source endpoint. Again, that's basically just going to be what is the IP address of the source server, and provide the credentials to access. And again, make sure that whatever user you're providing has the necessary access to be able to pull that data from the source. And then you're going to do the same thing for the target. You're going to specify a target endpoint, again, IP address, and then credentials. And in this case, the credentials are going to need to be able to create tables and also insert and update and delete from those tables. Then you're going to set up a migration type. So you're going to have a choice. Do you just want to pull the existing snapshot of the data as is, or do you want all of the data and capture ongoing changes? And that's what I've been using it for. And then you identify the tables that you want to replicate. So one thing to keep in mind is that DMS will actually create those tables at the target. You don't need to create them. So you just add that table to the task definition. And if it doesn't exist on the target, DMS will create it for you when you start the task running. And it will also replicate schema changes. So if you wind up adding a column to a table or removing a column from a table, that will get replicated across. So you don't have to manage that. And something else to keep in mind is that indexes are not replicated and they're not created. So if you add a table to a task, you're going to need to manage the indexes independently at the target of the DMS task definition. And that's it for today's video. I hope you learned something. Please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel. I'm looking forward to your comments and questions. If there's something that I went over in this video that you want to delve into more detail, please let me know. Have a good day, guys. Bye.